hopefully it'll let me admit people from the waiting room while we go.
Hi, folks. Thanks for coming out on in some respects, a somewhat balmy winter night, or at least a less stormy winter that we had a few nights ago. This workshop is part of the town's master plan project, and we're working in conjunction with OCPC to produce a new master plan. We haven't had one here in East Bridgewater for over 30 years. And so it's time to take a look at the town, take a look at our land, take a look at our people, our businesses, our homes and such, and figure out where do we want to go from here in terms of land use issues, transportation issues, recreation and open space, any number of other aspects of the town, which we'll talk a bit more as we go into the evening. This workshop is one of the ways of gathering information, gathering viewpoints, opinions, questions, concerns from residents of East Bridgewater, from people who work here, people who own property here, people who have businesses here. This is an addition. I think we had the online survey has how many responses?
We're over 500 survey responses so far. We're doing incredible.
There'll be more of these live workshops also in sessions later this year. And coming to a culmination, I'm hoping this spring, with a draft master plan. But the idea here is OCPC is making this happen because they've got expertise, they've got people to put all this together. But more importantly is what and how you participate, whether it's through the surveys, or whether these sessions here, because it's the East Bridgewater master plan. It's not the OCPC master plan. It's not the Charlie Seelig master plan. It's East Bridgewater. So hearing from you all tonight is going to make a difference on putting this together. So thanks very much for coming in and spending your evening here rather than doing any number of other things you might rather be doing.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And we are doing tonight hybrid, so I have Zoom running while we're doing this, and hopefully we'll be able to add participants in as we go. But just a quick introduction, my name is Rhiannon. I'm a senior planner at Old Colony Planning Council, and I'm the project manager for East Bridgewater's master plan. I also have a bunch of my coworkers hidden in the audience with me. So we have Jason, Jay, Matt, and Nick all here, if you guys can wave. We disguised them in. So the second half of this will be less than me talking at you, because that's the boring part. And we'll have more option for interaction, and they'll help largely with that. And I will kind of stick back here and make sure that our hybrid folks joining are equally as involved. Does anybody have any questions before we get started tonight? Awesome. So we're going to go through why we do the master plan and what the process is going to look like, and then a review of a portion of the data that goes into it from our end, the work that we've put together so far. This is the first public meeting, but we've been working on this plan since September, October. So there's been a lot of headway work that had to go in to get us here. And then we'll talk about how that data and these conversations here turn into an actual master plan, how this goes from content on a screen to something that the town can actually implement. And then at the end, you'll have an opportunity. We have some large blow-ups of the maps, and I have printed copies of the slides. A lot of the data graphics are small and awful to read, and I don't expect you to want to read all the numbers right this second, but you probably won't be able to visually anyway. So we'll take a look at those, and then we'll have an activity, and we can talk about the best parts of East Bridgewater, and not that there could be anything wrong with East Bridgewater, but if there was, what would that be? So our role as OCP, this is going to drive me nuts, I'm going to move this, sorry. Our role at OCPC is, most importantly, as Charlie suggested, is to listen to everybody. And a large part of that is the survey, because it's the easiest way to access the most people in town. But it's also really important that we have these conversations and get direct input. We're here to understand the community's goals, including meeting with department staff and in addition to community and making sure that when this plan is done, it actually responds to the direction that East Bridgewater is looking to move into. So what is a master plan? This is the general law text. It is, Massachusetts has lots of legal requirements that make it an official master plan, which is why it is so long, and I'm sorry that the survey is so long if you're one of the 500 people who have taken it. But we want to make sure that we get all the information from you and we meet the state's requirements. So it's a statement through text, maps, illustration, or other to provide a basis for decision making regarding the long-term physical development of the municipality. So they're supposed to be for about 10 or more years, but maybe not 30. So we'll be back in 2034. So the state has required elements that they ask us to include. So all of these are state mandated except for sustainability and climate change. We add the sustainability and climate change because most Massachusetts community have a municipality vulnerability preparedness plan and or a hazards preparation plan. And we want to make sure that all of those goals for natural disasters are included in there because it's part of the requirement for those additional plans your town might have. So the others are land use, housing, economic development, natural and cultural resources, open space and recreation, services and facilities, transportation and circulation of goods, and implementation strategies. So how do we get all this text and how do we actually make it happen over the next decade? And what it means for the town in a deeper detail, it's really here to take your voice and make sure that it's the direction that the town's moving in. So in addition to the fact that you're having planning board meetings and conservation board meetings and your select board meetings, all those projects that they're working on should be in the master plan, and everything else you want to see the town doing is in the master plan. And the goal is to get those boards up to speed and get everybody on the same page again. Kind of like a 10-year reset. For more specific projects, a lot of times it can target the need for land preservation if there's certain identified projects or targeted economic development, and help the town figure out where they might need more staff or more capital to make improvements for the town. So what type of information do we look at? We look at all of it. We look at the existing documents that have already been in place. We go over your zoning and bylaws. We talk to the town about their priority areas. We look at all the soil, water data, your land use data, agriculture, transportation, wildlife habitat, and so forth. We also do a lot of demographic data, which will be most of what the second half of our presentation is focused on. And most importantly, again, is your input, because I can write all the data, nobody wants to read that. So we need your input and how it's applicable and what you want to see happen. So to get your input, we're doing public workshops such as today. We'll have some tabling events. We'll go to public spaces and give people a chance to come and talk to us if they want to talk about ideas or ask questions about the project. We have a website hosted on Old Colony Planning Council's website, and we're also using social media through Old Colony Planning Council and the town to advertise these events. You can submit public comments at any time. At the very end, there'll be a specific time period for reviewing the draft itself. But public comments also come in the form of, there's plenty of space in the survey for comments that we go through, and my email is on almost every document, and if not, Charlie's is on it, and you're able to make comments about any part of the process you have at any time. And then additionally, the town puts together a master plan committee, and then they'll meet with myself and OCPC staff, and they'll be the first ones to really read through the plan and make sure it's really getting to the point that the town wants it to be at. So our timeline, we're already in winter, we're already in the second part towards the home stretch, so we've done tons of demographic research and had ongoing outreach in the survey launch. This winter, we're focused on plan writing and public meetings. And then come spring, around May, we'll have a final public review. So the next half of our presentation is focused on data. anybody have any questions before we move forward? So I like to joke that this is more data than you'll ever want to know about your town, so I'm apologizing in advance. So the median age for East Bridgewater is 39.9 years old, with the largest population group being between age 18 to 64 at 63%. The racial makeup of the town is 87% white, and 3% of people identified as Black, Hispanic, or 2 or more races, and 1% identified as Asian. So East Bridgewater has been continuously growing. There was a peak in growth more so between 2000 and 2010 with a little over 6% in population growth compared to 2010 to 2020, which showed only 4.6% growth. You can see it's still not quite plateauing, definitely still increasing. For housing, there's 4,949 households. And this is census data. So households is like a specific term that they use. So just to clarify, households is how they identify like a family unit in a house, but there are 5,116 occupied units. So there are single individuals living in other units. The average size per household is 2.9, but I promise you there's no partial people living in any houses. And this is actually a little bit higher than the county. The county average is a little bit closer to 2.5. Same for Massachusetts. So there's, in general, more people living together in houses in this town. And the median value of houses from the census data is 395,100. We know with COVID that there's been an enormous amount of up and down change for property value. So we know that these numbers might not necessarily reflect where we're at today. This is just the most recent census data. So for housing, additionally, we look at subsidized housing inventory. So this is a mandated program through the state of Massachusetts that requires every town to have 10% of their housing stock meet their requirements for subsidized housing. At this time, there's only 176 units, or 3.39%. So one thing that we'll want to look at with this master plan is how can the town diversify its housing stock, and what types of houses does the current zoning support, or what might we want to see different. For the school, there's 2,008 students in the district total. 90% of children ages 5 to 17 speak English only. So another 10% of students can speak English and another language or another language only. And that number is up to 92% English only speaking at the age of 18. 95.7% of residents in East Bridgewater graduate high school, and 30.2% obtain a bachelor's degree. For income, the average income is $49,445 per capita, and the median household is $110,842. And the town's poverty rate is 6.9%. which is a little bit higher than the county, but significantly lower than the state. This county overall has a lower poverty rate than the state's average. And with income comes employment and economy. So the average person in town is commuting 33.3 minutes to work. And the town is its own largest employer, with the public schools and municipal jobs combined. The other highest employer is the YMCA. Let me take a look, and we'll have access to all these tables after the presentation too. There's more businesses. I just want to clarify too that this is 50 or more employees, so this doesn't include all the small businesses. So the local economy is relatively diverse in East Bridgewater. We look at the tax levy, which is where you're getting tax income from. So you want your CIP levy to be as high as you can get it, because that takes it off of the burden of the residents. And 10% is actually really well for this part of the state, and shows that there has been prosperity for businesses and industry, and we hope to continue to see the success in that. Transportation. From 2020 to 2023, there were no fatal car accidents in town. Most car accidents are not injury at all related. They're just personal property damage, which can be cars hitting each other. It can also be most accidents that happen in smaller towns are actually just single vehicle accidents. It's just people going off the road and taking out mailboxes or hitting guardrails. So overall, it's relatively low. Though the chart makes it look intimidating, it is relatively low. But when we think about where these accidents might be occurring, we can take a look at where in town they cluster. So for those of you who drive around, you might look at the map and think about what intersections kind of line up with where those blue dots are. You might have ideas that you're not surprised that those aren't the highlighted areas, but this is Massachusetts State Police data, and they kind of cluster up relatively where in town the most accidents happen. So here is a copy of the zoning and land use maps that we've produced. So I have both of these taped up here when we're ready to move around the room for you to look at closely. But one thing that I love about the coloring in these maps that you can see is you can see where the land use lines up exactly with the zoning. You can see like the colorful line that goes through the center that matches where most of your business zoning is in town. So when we compare these maps, it's good for us to be able to see, is what we're saying we're doing really lining up with the actuality? So for conservation, this is Mass Audubon data, and I always want to preface that this was released in 2019. It's their most recent, but they look at 5-year increments, and it takes them 2 years to put together each report. So this is looking at data most recently from 2017, which means that we already know it's outdated when we get it, but it does give us a representation of where we were standing with other towns. So Mass Audubon runs the numbers for conservation data, and then they also tell you your ranking in the state. So one of the big jump outs is that while there's lots of land that is being conserved, there's very little land in town that's under permanent conservation. And this is usually something that tricks people up because we have the Chapter 61 program in Massachusetts, which allows people to keep their land in temporary protection, but it's not the same as permanent conservation. So when a landowner goes to sell their property, they don't have to keep up with that Chapter 61 land use. The town will do their best to acquire it when they're able to, but it doesn't actually create a permanent protection for that parcel of land. So East Bridgewater actually ranked 300 out of 351 towns for permanently protected land. So these next maps look at biomap data, which is put out through the state of Massachusetts with the Nature Conservancy. So this past redo of the biomap, if anybody's familiar with the data, they added regional specified components. So this is really interesting. Instead of just looking at what's relatively important to federal and state, they also took into account which landforms are important on a more local scale for wildlife. So that's going to be the colors that are detailed on the right map, and some of those light purple and faded red colors show land that, while it might not have been 100% considered important on a state or federal level for whatever measures that they're looking at, it does show ecological importance for wildlife in our area. So now that you're all asleep, I am here to tell you how this becomes chapters and tell you why you came tonight. So the next part of this is, now that you know all this information about the town, in addition to your experience of living in town, which is what, as OCPC staff, we don't have, is to tell us your thoughts on it and to get a closer look at the data. And we'll take your comments and put that into a plan, and we'll form ideas with you. So how ideally this works is, this meeting, we go over all of it. And then the next meeting, I'll take all of your comments and feedback and come up with some like more specific discussion topics. And we can do a series of roundtable conversations and really flesh out ideas that the town's interested in pursuing. And those will directly correlate with the goals that go into the plan. So outside of this, though, we ask you to stay engaged with the process. So if you haven't taken the survey is still active and online. I have the QR code. I also have printed copies in the room in case if you leave this room, you know you won't take it. And you can comment on the plan at any time. Like I said, you can contact Charlie to make a statement, or you can contact myself. And we're looking to do the next meeting on February 22nd. We just selected a date. We'll likely have it right here in the same room and same time, but I will put out an advertisement for it next week. And if you're already on the email list, or if you gave your email today, I'll send you an invite directly. And then it'll also be on the town's page. They'll have posters downstairs. And if you have anywhere else you would like me to share it to, I'm happy to do that as well. So the next step is to get up and stop listening to me talk at you, which is the better part of this. So I have the maps placed throughout the room. I also have a stack of printed copies of the slides if there was data that you wanted to look at more closely. And I'll also post it to the website if you don't want to review it tonight, but you want to go back and look at it. And the survey's out if you want to take it now. So we'll do about 20 minutes of looking around at all the info, maybe more, maybe less, based on how conversations are going. And then I have sticky notes out, and you can start at any time if you want to write down ideas of things you'd like to see talked about in the master plan, things you really like about living in East Bridgewater, or things you don't like. You can anonymously, you don't have to write your name on them, write it on a sticky note, and we'll put it all up on a poster. And I'll kind of synthesize those ideas with survey comments. They'll get included in the public comment process. Does anybody have any questions about any of all of it? Yeah.
I have one question. Is the next workshop going to be the same as this, or is it going to be more advanced,
It'll be more advanced, so it'll be more talking and having conversations. I'd like to have specific topics that we already know based on, like, the survey's had an incredible amount of responses that I haven't started analyzing yet, because I don't want to analyze it when there's been so many more responses coming in. I thought we maxed out at 350, and then I went and checked it again, and it was 500, and the number's still growing, which a huge shout out to the Buzz Around for advertising that. The numbers directly correlate with the day that newsletter goes out. It shows that local news is helping spread the word, and we always appreciate that. So I'll take a look at that and those topics and continue talking with Charlie about what he thinks we need to talk about the most, whether it's economic development, if there's transportation concerns, if it's conservation, and we can really write out the ideas and talk about how we can address them. And we can do that hybrid as well. We probably won't do it hybrid in the same setting. We'll definitely do February 22nd in person. If there's a lot of interest, though, I can run a Zoom group call another later date, if that's easier for people. Anything else? All right, well, I encourage everybody to get up and look at the materials. The maps are way prettier up close than on the screen. If you have any questions, everybody can answer your questions. I'm going to put people on the spot, though. Jay, raise your hand. Jay helps me with most of the maps, so if you have questions specifically about how maps come together, he can answer them. Nick is a senior planner specifying in economic development. If you have questions about maybe not specific to things that are currently happening in East Bridgewater, but things you would like to see happen in some of those planning elements, he could definitely help talk you through some of those. And then Matt and Jason are newest to our team. but they have both lived in the region at some point or currently do, and they are local experts, to say the least, including knowing a lot about housing and conservation. All right, yeah.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
So I know you've done a lot of work up until now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great. And that's the existing map right now, right, as it stands?
Yes.
So are you going to make suggestions on changing it? Do you guys have some ideas about where the direction that this should go in? Or is that what this is all about, is people to make suggestions? Or you guys must have some, who did you work with in town before this, prior to this?
Prior to this, we worked with Charlie. Over the next month, we're meeting many department heads, including public safety officials.
Right.
We'll have a lot of, we've met with the planning board. We gave them a run through of the process of what we were doing. But over the next month, we'll meet with department heads and kind of talk to them about where they need to see change or where they think that there's areas for change. I don't like coming in with a prescribed idea of how you should change your zoning, because I don't live here, and if somebody came to my town and told me how to change my zoning, even as a planner, I'd probably be pretty mad at them. So I'm happy to support ideas about how to change zoning based on if you're looking to expand business, if you're looking, most towns right now are really interested in mixed-use buildings. So having your first floor have small commercial spaces that encourage small business and not huge box stores, and instead having some housing on top, or having 2 levels of stores and 1 level of housing. So we've been seeing a lot of work on that in the area, and that's something that we can talk about, like where does zoning support that and where does it not?
So the changes that could come out of all this could come from this group,
Yes,
and also all your meetings with the department heads and the boards and so forth?
Yes.
All the players in town?
and I also want to also mention that the master plan itself can't change the zoning. It can only set up for the town to change the zoning. So all zoning changes have to go to town vote,
Right.
and they have to pass by 2/3 majority, and it has to be approved by the planning and select board to get to that point. So our best effort here is to get all the data and show the community's support for zoning changes that they actually want to see.
So all the changes basically have to go through the planning, they, in the end, have to agree to all that, is that correct? Whatever, if people here decide that we.
I'm gonna defer to Charlie on that,
Well,
just because it's
So
different. in
the
every town.
master plan itself needs to be approved by the planning board. However, whether the zoning changes that are suggested in the master plan or zoning changes are suggested, by residents or anybody else, the process is those proposed zoning changes go to the planning board. The planning board can recommend or not recommend, that's fine, but then the articles, whether, even if they're not recommended, then go to town meeting for an up or down vote at town meeting. So certainly, I think many residents will take into consideration whether the planning board recommends or doesn't recommend something, but the ultimate decision is with the townspeople themselves, the folks who show up for town meeting.
And zoning changes is only like a part of it, so I get to write these super exciting chapters on critical town facilities and sort of like public services. So the changes that come out of that is sort of like talking with the police department and fire department around sort of like what are their capital needs over the next 10 years. Do they need new police cars or fire trucks or new buildings? The council on aging and the schools and the libraries, like what are their capital needs? And so there's sort of like zoning pieces, economic development, capital needs, infrastructural needs. So it's sort of tries to capture a wide lens of where the town sees itself going over the next 10 years.
I guess the real question is, do you want to see zoning change or not? Because I won't focus the conversation on that if you don't want to, but if you do want to, we can definitely talk about that. Because I've worked in several towns proposing master plans, and everybody's on a different page, and it just depends on where their town is headed, on what they want to see. And some would rather much focus on things that don't involve changing zoning. And some definitely see issues and concerns with their zoning, and that's what they want to tackle.
I think it's a piece of the puzzle, because, I mean, there's mandates that our town needs to look at, that come down from the state, and we
Right.
receive money if we are in compliance, so we want to make sure that's a part, but I don't think it's the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Did that answer? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay, everybody get up and have fun. You all don't look very happy.